When the game is over, it all goes back in the box. Jess reminded me the other day that I used to actually say this a lot to her and her sister when they were little. When you finish playing, make sure that you pack it all away. When the game is over, make sure that it all goes back in the box before you pull out another game. I've got to admit, this was much more about my need for a tidy house than it ever was about teaching them a valuable life lesson. But valuable life lessons are exactly what we've been learning over the last couple of weeks. We've discovered that everything that we accumulate in life, all of the property, the cars, the business, the success, the money, is just temporary. All of it eventually ends up broken, spent, or useless. We think that having lots of stuff gives us control, but stuff doesn't last. It doesn't fulfill. It doesn't make us content. It doesn't give us our identity or our worth. And it all ends up in the same place, the dump. Last week, Norman taught us that the relationships that we have, our inner game, our character, is what is really important. And whether we like it or not, our outer game, our body, is slowly wasting away. But our character is being formed by every choice that we make. And that's what really matters to God. And that's why we so desperately need Him to help guide us on that journey. As we begin this morning, I want us to take a look at a video. We performed it live here at Papster about 3 years ago, but it fit too well this morning for us not to repeat it. So take a look at this.
Jesus, I am so excited today. It's like I woke up and thought today is the day to get working for Jesus.
Kat, I'm so excited to find someone who's ready to take action and get things done.
Oh man, I am that girl.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I've got something perfect for you. So let's get started. What are you doing? Stand up. Remember, we were gonna take action.
Yeah, but this is where I always sit.
Right, but I need more than this.
Oh, I know what you're getting at. Okay, Jesus, how much do you want?
What?
$50? Is that enough?
Oh, that's not what I meant.
Oh, all right. Well, 100 then, you know. I mean, you drive a hard bargain. Okay, but you might not want to cash this till next Friday. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There you go.
Okay, Kat, really, I do think it's great that you want to give, but I want you to mentor a younger woman.
Ooh, yeah, right. Well, Jesus, you know, I'm not really into, like, teaching people and stuff. I mean, I don't really get into that.
Okay, okay, you know that woman at the office, Amy?
Yeah.
I want you to take her out to lunch. Tell her about me.
Well, Amy is different. I mean, like, really different, you know?
I know, but she needs to know about me.
And I can tell the people at the church to call her. I mean, they get paid to do things like that.
I want you to do that.
Jesus, I just don't feel comfortable doing that.
What are you doing? I am waiting for my coffee, fighting off a panic.
No, Kat, the problem is
Something to lighten the stress.
you're too
A little
comfortable.
light reading. Something of the calendar tries this. Would rather glue.
I'm loving this chair. I've got to tell you, I can totally relate to this woman. I am way more comfortable sitting in this chair than I am getting up and speaking to you today. I'd be a whole lot more comfortable if someone was serving me, but you know, I'm just saying. But I can't just sit here this morning, because I've been called to speak to you about another truth, about an undeniable, irrefutable truth about the game. A truth so simple that it is often overlooked. When you begin the game, you don't know what the outcome will be. But we mustn't let the uncertainty keep us from playing the game, because what I know for sure is that if you never play the game, you will definitely never win. When I was a little girl, our family would holiday in the small east coast town of Whangamata. My grandparents lived there, and it is still one of the places that I most love to visit in the whole world. It is the place where we would spend our days at the beach. We would swim, we would laze in the sun, we would eat way too much food. And in the evenings, and when the weather wasn't great, we would go to Grandma and Granddad's and we would play canasta, the game that has become our family obsession. But before I was old enough to play canasta, time at Grandma and Granddad's could be boring because I was the only one who didn't know how to play. And that's when Grandma introduced me to the game of sorry. I love the game of sorry. It's a board game that she would play with me when everyone else played canasta. I play it with my girls. I still love to play. The object of sorry is to get all 4 of the coloured pawns from the start position safely home without being swapped, sent backwards or returned to the start. But the thing I love the most about the game of sorry is that you could never tell who was going to win until the very end. It was anyone's game. I remembered playing with Grandma, and she would be annihilating me, and I would be feeling all upset and defeated, and she would always say, "Karyn, it's not over till it's over. It's anyone's game." I think my sister got it from her because she says the same thing. The best days were when she would be just wasting me, but then she would become completely unstuck and I would be victorious. When you begin the game, sometimes you lose. But if you never play the game, you will definitely never win. Larry Loudon is a university philosophy professor, and he's written a book about risk. In his book, he writes an entire chapter about household dangers. And some of those dangers are what you would expect. 460,000 people a year are injured by kitchen knives. Manual and power saws account for 100,000 injuries a year. But some risks are surprising. Every year, 20 people in America are strangled to death by their curtain cords. And 4,000 of us, 4,000, are seriously injured by our pillows. I'm not sure how that works. But in his book, John Ortberg talks about what he thinks could be the most dangerous object in our homes. The back reclining, deeply cushioned, foot-resting death trap that we lovingly call the lazy boy. Our lazy boys are generally not bought for their beauty. I remember the one that we had growing up. It was a beautiful little floral orange and brown number. Mum eventually threw it out, and to my absolute horror, Richard brought it home. It then took me several more years to get that chair out of my house. We generally buy them or pinch them from our mother-in-laws for one reason: comfort. The really interesting thing about the chair that we had is that before Richard brought it home and before it was my mum's, it was actually my nana's lazy boy chair. You've got to love that. It was a generational lazy boy. We had it in the family and passed it down. And as much as I was keen to get rid of it when it lived in our home, I cherish the memories that I had of it when it lived at my nana's. At nana's, it was pure comfort. When she would look after me, the chair was positioned directly in front of the TV. She would sit me there with my feet up, and she would put an electric blanket over my knees, set to the perfect temperature. And she'd then offer to make me anything I'd like for lunch. I always chose the same thing. There was a ring of rice around the outside of the plate. then a ring of tin spaghetti and a soft poached egg in the middle. Bizarre, I know. I'm pretty glad that my taste buds have developed somewhat anyway. She would then make me a hot, sweet cup of tea, which, just so you know, I was not allowed, which made it even more delicious. The lazy boy chair, an electric blanket, my favourite meal, a cup of tea, and of course, the piece de resistance, the remote control, to watch whatever I wanted. My ultimate happy place, bliss, pure comfort. Sadly, in our pursuit to accumulate stuff, in our pursuit of power, our world has become busier and more stressful, and we find ourselves chasing comfort, trying to minimise the problems and the stress and maximise our safety and security. But what's so dangerous about this chair is not the things that we do while we're in it, but the things that we don't do. It's the relationships that we never deepen. It's the people in need that you never help. It's the prayers that you'll never pray. It's the thoughts that you'll never think. It's the adventures that you'll never take, the races you never run, the battles you'll never fight. It's the tears you won't cry and the laughs you won't laugh. We were made for something more than life in a chair. But it could be the very thing that's holding us back. It could actually be the most dangerous object in our lives. Scientists at Berkeley University did a study a few years ago, and they put an amoeba in an ideal environment. There was the perfect temperature and humidity, perfect amount of light, perfect food conditions. The amoeba had no stress, no problems, no challenges. You know what happened to it? It died. Too much comfort can be lethal. I want to introduce you to Larry Walters. Larry Walters' boyhood dream was to fly, and he joined the Air Force until his poor eyesight disqualified him from the job of being a pilot. After he was discharged, he would sit in his backyard watching the jets fly overhead. As he sat one day in his comfy lawn chair, he hatched a plan. He brought 45 weather balloons from an army surplus store, and he tied them to his chair and he filled them with helium. He then made himself a picnic, some sandwiches and some beer, and he put in his pellet gun. He strapped himself to his chair, and what he figured was that he would pop a few of these balloons when it was time to descend. He planned to float to a height of about 30 feet. He thought he'd enjoy a few hours, and then he'd come back down to earth. But things didn't quite work out as Larry planned. When his friends cut the cord, he didn't float lazily to 30 feet, but instead he shot up into the air like he'd been shot from a cannon. He didn't stop at 100 feet. He didn't stop at 1,000 feet, but eventually levelled off at 16,000 feet. At that height, he was too afraid to shoot any of those balloons. So for more than 14 hours, he just sat there, cold and afraid. With passing airline pilots all radioing into LAX saying the same thing, "You're never gonna believe this." But eventually, Larry got up the nerve to shoot a few balloons. And slowly he descended, and when he nearly hit the earth, he got tangled in some power lines and had to be rescued. As they led Larry away, a reporter asked him why he did it. And he replied, "Because a man can't just sit there." I'm guessing that Larry isn't completely wise. I'm assuming that Larry is not the smartest cookie in the jar. But you know what? He's right about one thing. A man can't just sit there. Life is too short to stay comfortable. Comfort is great for a time, but it never brings excitement or challenge or adventure. And God wants us to do life with Him, and life with Him is never ordinary. It's never boring, but it's often not very comfortable. But it does always end up being the very best thing that we can do. God is in the business of moving us out of our chair. He is in the business of calling us. And He has called ordinary people to join Him to do all manner of things from the beginning of time. The Bible is in fact a collection of stories of how people have joined with God to fulfill a calling in their life. And I'm going to refer to a lot of these stories today, but especially to the calling of Moses. It's found in Exodus chapter 3, and I'd love you to turn there with me today. So it's Exodus chapter 3, it's page 36 in our church Bibles. Scholars have identified a consistent pattern in these stories, and we're going to take a look at them today. So firstly, they begin with the initial call. Noah, would you build me an ark? Abraham, would you leave your life and begin a new community for me? Esther, would you go before the king? Hannah, will you give me your son? David, will you kill Goliath? Jeremiah, will you rebuild the wall? Jonah, will you go to Nineveh? Matthew, will you follow me? Peter, will you build my church? But in the story of Moses, we see God appear to him as a burning bush. Would that not freak you out? Then in verse 6, He lets Moses know who he is. He says, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then his request in verse 7, he says, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress. I am aware of their suffering. I have come down to rescue them. And then in verse 10 he says, now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt. What we see in these calls is that God isn't necessarily asking those who are the best suited or the most capable. He isn't waiting for perfect timing. He isn't even asking those with the best reputation or character. And more often than not, God doesn't seem particularly concerned whether it's going to be comfortable or not. He just calls. The second thing we see in this pattern is that there is a response. Have a baby at 99? You have got to be kidding me. The idea of having one at 40 is, anyway. Go to Nineveh. Thanks very much, but I'd rather be swallowed by a fish. Thanks very much. Build your church. I don't know where to begin. But Moses has my favorite response of all. Not only did he have an excuse, he had several. Verse 11, who am I to lead your people? Then in chapter 4, verse 1, but what if they won't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? Chapter 4, verse 10, but I'm not very good with words, God. I never have been. And then finally in verse 13, his last desperate plea, Lord, please send anyone else. I don't know if your initial response is anything like Moses, is anything like mine often is. But generally, our response to God isn't, oh, God, I love that idea. Thank you for calling me to do that. But God, I like a difficult response. Do you think you could add more of a challenge to that? Generally, that's not our normal response. Generally, our response is fear. Generally, our response is backtracking. Generally, our response can just be a flat out no. Well, the next time you feel afraid, the next time you don't feel like God can use you or that you perhaps aren't capable of doing what He's asking, I want you to remember that Noah was a drunk. Jacob was a liar. Leah was ugly. Joseph was abused. Moses had a stuttering problem. Gideon was afraid. Samson had long hair and was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah and Timothy were too young. David had an affair and was a murderer. Elijah was suicidal. Isaiah preached naked. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job was bankrupt. John the Baptist ate bugs. Peter denied Christ. The disciples fell asleep. Martha worried about everything. I love Martha. The Samaritan woman was divorced more than once. Zacchaeus was too small. Paul was too religious. Timothy had an ulcer. And Lazarus was dead. You think that God can't use you? God can use you. He's God. The reality is that if you are facing a challenge that would cause you to grow or be helpful to the people around you, but you're feeling a bit nervous about that, there's a good chance that God is in that challenge. On the other hand, if it's been a while since you've felt scared, if you're not facing any challenges, then maybe you've been sitting in that chair too long. The third aspect to these stories, to these callings, is that even though the initial response is resistance or fear, even though there is overwhelming doubt, God encourages. He reassures. You know, in the story of Moses, in chapter 3, verse 12, he says, "But I will be with you." In verse 14, he says, "I am who I am. Tell the people I am has sent me to you." In chapter 4, he shows Moses all of the miracles that he's going to perform for him. And then in verse 12, he says, "I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say." Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you. Do you know that do not be afraid is the single most common command in all of Scripture? I love that. I love that because God gets it. He gets us. He understands how we feel. He cares, but he still calls. He's still in the business of getting us to move out of that chair. Fourthly, we're left with a decision to make. What really matters when God calls us is not whether we feel adequate or not. That's a given. That's why he promises to go with us. What matters is the choice that we make. What matters is if we allow him to fulfill his calling in our life. Moses gave plenty of excuses. He tried harder than most to get out of his calling, but eventually he gave in. Eventually he let God fulfill that calling in his life. Often I think we just want to know the outcome, you know? We want proof. God, if you are asking me to be more generous, just show me that I'm still going to be able to pay my mortgage. If I serve in this area, God, I just need to know that I'm still going to have some time for me. If I'm going to sell my house, then just show me where I will be going. But the trouble with knowing the outcome is that where proof is possible, faith is impossible. We'd all love a guarantee ahead of time. We all know, we all want to know how the story ends. But it's faith that gives us hope and courage. It's faith that stretches and grows and connects us to God. If we always knew the outcome ahead of time, there'd be no point in playing the game. God makes the call, but we have to make a move. The final aspect to these calls is that every time someone says yes to God, the world changes a little bit. God did the most amazing things through Moses, He He turned his staff into a snake. He turned water into blood. He sent plagues. He parted a sea, for goodness sake. He delivered millions of people. If you've not read his story for a while, or if you've not read it at all, take the time to read it this week. It's an amazing story. Life may not have always been comfortable for Moses, but wow, what a life. When we say yes to God, his light shines a little bit brighter. People experience a little more joy. Someone has a bit more peace. A person grows. People connect. A battle is won. Jesus is seen, and God is honoured. Sometimes, however, we say no. And every time we say no to God, we also change just a little bit. Our heart gets a little bit harder. Our fear gets a little bit bigger. And our addiction to comfort gets a little bit stronger. God makes the call, but we have to make a move. It's up to us. We were made for a purpose. We were made for a mission, for a calling. At funerals, we never hear about how many houses people had. We don't hear about how much money they made. We don't hear about what they wore or who they beat. We hear about the difference that person made in the lives of the people they knew. Nobody wants to think that at our funeral, our eulogy will declare that our lives didn't matter. We want to make a difference. We want people to say, they made a difference. They made my life that much better. I'm a better person because they were in my life. Because deeper than our need for food or air or water is our need for meaning. Our need to know that our lives count for something. John Ortberg in his book tells the story of Johnny. And Johnny works at a grocery store. And one day he went to a training event where a lady named Barbara was talking to 3,000 workers for a supermarket chain. She spoke about making a difference to bless someone's life. She talked about how important it is to look for these moments each day. A month later, she received a call from Johnny. He proudly told her that he was a 19-year-old bagger in a supermarket and that he had Down syndrome. He told her that he liked what she'd said, but he didn't think that he could do anything for his customers. After all, he said, I'm just a bagger. He proceeded to tell her that he'd then had an idea. He decided that every night after work, he'd find a thought for the day, for his next shift, something positive, something that would remind people of how good it was to be alive or how much people matter. And then every night, his dad would help him type up that saying 6 times on a page on the computer. And Johnny would print out 50 pages. He'd carefully cut 300 copies and he'd sign each one. And each time Johnny finished bagging the groceries, he would put his saying on top of the last bag. He would look the person straight in the eye and he would say, I've put a great saying in your bag. I hope it helps you have a great day. Thanks for coming in. A month later, the store manager called Barbara to tell her that the line at Johnny's checkout was 3 times longer than anyone else's. It went all the way down the frozen food aisle. And so he came out that day and he opened up more checkout lines, but he couldn't get any customers to move. They'd say, it's all right, we'll wait, we want to be in Johnny's line. One lady even told the manager that she used to come into the store just once a week, but now she pops in every time she goes past just to get Johnny's thought for the day. Johnny is doing more than filling bags with groceries. He is filling lives with hope. And when people get Johnny's words, they are reminded of the beauty of one person forgetting his own limitations and instead making his life a blessing to someone else. Our calling starts where we are, not where we think we should be. God has us where we are for a reason, and it doesn't mean that that is where we'll always be, or that we won't end up some other place, some other time. But if we can't find our mission right here, right now, on this day, then we have no hope of finding it some other time, because right here, right now, this is where God is. It was Theodore Roosevelt who said, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." That's all God calls us to. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Every day is full of decisions. Wake up or hit the snooze button. Whole grain cereal or a meat pie and Coke. Dress for comfort or for style. Go to the gym or take a nap. Go to life group or turn on the TV. Life is full of decisions. Some of them even determine the course of our life. Who will I marry? Where will I work? Where will I live? But for most of us, our decisions are determined by one concern: comfort. But our calling, our God-given story, is too important to be held back by comfort. A couple of things that we need to know about our calling. In our home, in our neighbourhood, at our work, at school, at university, at tech, we are the most important person if we would just let God work through us. You know, it's about putting up our hand and saying to God, "God, I'm feeling a bit nervous about this. I don't know if I am gifted at this. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. But you know what? I've decided that I just can't sit anymore. I can't stay there. I can't keep living a mediocre life. I can't stay where I am. I need you to work through me to make a difference that matters." Another disturbing but really important thing that we need to know about our calling is that sadly, it's not about us. And I think this is the one that we struggle with the most, because we really like life to be all about us. That's when we're most comfortable. But I think that God tells us all through the Bible, all through every person that he ever called, that his mission, his purpose is to bless somebody else. Be salt to make food tastier. Be light to brighten the dark. Serve someone else. Love him. Love others. Your calling is not about you. And lastly, our calling will use our strengths and our weaknesses. God asked Moses, "What is in your hand?" His staff represented his livelihood, what he knew how to do, what he was good at. It represented his wealth, his security, and his strength. But Moses stuttered. And what God was asking him to do was to go before Pharaoh and speak. And Moses couldn't get his head around that. And he protested over and over and over. But often, the thing that limits us the most, the thing that is our greatest weakness, allows us to lean on God. And when we lean on God, it allows him to speak, him to act, him to work. Our weakness can become our greatest strength. Johnny the Bagger didn't have his calling in spite of his limitations. Rather, he had the calling because of his limitations. His greatest burden became his greatest gift. God's calling on our life begins with a friendship. God is far more interested in having a relationship with us than he is in us having us follow a set of rules. First and foremost, God wants us to get to know him like he already knows us. And you know, for most of us, when we first embrace a relationship with Jesus, you know, we had the attitude, I will follow you wherever you go. I will do whatever you ask until we realize that his call on our life could lead us to places that we'd never expected to go. That he would ask us to go to places that we didn't want to go, to do things that we didn't want to do, and it would cost us more than we ever expected to sacrifice. But the question remains the same. Will we choose our comfort or God's calling? Where are you right now? Are you resisting? Are you making excuses? What is God asking you to stand up and do right now? Is he asking you to step up and be the man in your family that he designed you to be? Is he asking you to put your wife and your kids ahead of your boss and your career? Is he asking you to stop with the gossiping? Is he asking you to let go of some pride, some resentment? Is he asking you to forgive someone? Is he asking you to be a young woman of integrity and honor? Maybe he's just asking for some time. Most often, to answer a call from God isn't comfortable. It's not always easy or comfortable to love and offer grace. Sometimes it's not comfortable to be generous, kind, or forgiving. It's not comfortable putting our family first and committing to their needs. But what if? What if we turned off the TV and played a game? What if we had conversations in the car instead of iPods and headphones? What if we figure out how much physical and emotional energy we need to give those we love and then give our leftovers to work instead of the other way around? What if we read together? What if we began by simply making the decision that we would give relationships top priority and that no relationship we have would be more important than the relationship that we have with God? Because once we start getting to know him more, once we embrace a relationship with him, then we get to hear him. We get to recognize his voice in the chaos. We understand his call. We fight less and we surrender more. We experience less fear and more excitement. We are less ordinary and we are more extraordinary. We worry less and we love more. We are less stingy and more generous. We live a life of purpose, a life that counts for something so much more than comfort. But first, we have to decide that we just can't sit anymore. When will you decide that you just can't sit anymore?